afternoon. The April 8th, 2025 board work session and rule development and first public hearing is now in order. Paul, roll call, please. Here.
Ms. Wright?
Here.
Mr. Thomas?
Here.
Ms. Campbell?
Here.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We welcome Ms. Sue Hen and standing in for Dr. Rindell. Can you address the board with the items on the agenda today?
Yes, sir. On today's agenda, we have the rule development, proposed policy revisions, including the OLA Volume 25, Number 2, recommended updates. And then we will hear a presentation from our team regarding the long-term strategic facilities plan update.
Great. First on today's agenda, we have the rule development, proposed policy revisions, including the OLA Volume 25, Number 2, recommended updates. The public hearing is now open to the public comments. We will, in accordance with Florida law, accept the speakers on the following policies. Policy 0164, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 0165, meetings. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 0165-2, regular meetings. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 0165-3, special and emergency meetings. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 0166, exempt meetings. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2120, school improvement. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2125, school advisory councils for school improvement and accountability. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2260-01. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2280. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2411. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2421. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2423. Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2455, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2460, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? I'm getting there. Policy 2520, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 2800, is there anyone who would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone who would like to speak to this item? Policy 5136, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 5410-01, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 5463, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 5465, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 5780, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 8405, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Policy 8500, is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? Is there anyone that would like to speak to this item? There being none, okay. Last on the agenda, we have a long-term strategic facilities plan update by, you want to take it over?
Good afternoon, everyone. Sue Han, and I'm the Assistant Superintendent for Facilities Services, and I'm really pleased to be here today to kind of give you a mid project status report on the long-term strategic facilities plan. We kind of started this endeavor back last fall and started looking at our facilities, both condition as well as enrollment over the capacity of each school and how we can become more efficient, more effective. We have many aging buildings. We've invested a lot of resources in our aging buildings, and that maybe is not a sustainable model going forward. So we need to look at our long-term operating costs, our long-term capital costs, and just trying to look at are there things that we can do within our district from a facilities perspective to be better. And so we launched a long-term strategic facilities planning project in the fall and hired WXY consultants out of New York, as well as Sarah Lee Morrissey, who is a sub-consultant to them. She's more or less my counterpart in Volusia for many years, so she's very familiar with Florida facilities and to our neighbor to our north. So we've got some really good expertise looking at this from an outsider's point of view and looking at our data. As well as someone who's got some really good experience in the Florida facilities world. So I feel like we've got a really good team, including our own folks, Mr. Lindeman and Ms. Black on our team, who've done really good work that I think you see on an annual basis with our student accommodation plan, and Dave's work I think you see on every agenda with our project work. So we started the work in the fall and did a baseline conditions report out to the board in December of 2024. And that kind of gave you all the data. Like, this is what we found. We have done some community engagement, a little bit of surveying, and they will report on that today, so give you some things that we're hearing from the community. And along those lines, I did attend a community meeting last night that was a group effort between folks in Rockledge and Cocoa in support of the McNair Magnet Middle School, and heard some great things from community members and some great ideas for how they can work on addressing their low enrollment issue that is not an uncommon issue in our district. So really had a good conversation with the community, and believe that we're going to be having more conversations with the community as we go forward, because I think there's a lot of different options that we can look at. So with that, I'm going to jump into the presentation, and I know you guys are very used to me going rapidly through stuff. In this particular case, I'm probably going to talk a little bit slower and a little bit more, so bear with us. We've got a lot of information to portray for you this afternoon. So first and foremost, I want to really emphasize that this is a process. Like, we're in a study phase, so we're not ready to actually implement anything. But we want to get the board's perspective on some of the broader-based concepts that we've been evaluating over the past few months. So we're not suggesting any changes for 25-26, and in fact, at this point, we're not suggesting any changes at all. We really would like to hear from the board on the ranges of options that we've put together for you based on the data. And as I told the community last night, like, we're facilities people, so we deal with buildings and enrollment and capacity and capital costs and things like that, but there's also the people element that goes with this. And so it's really important that whatever solutions that we want to look at from a priority perspective, that we also engage the community, engage the people that are affected by these decisions, engage the educational side of the house. That's not my expertise, that's not our expertise. So when we talk about things like grade configuration changes, that might work great on paper. It may not work at all in the school environment. So we really have a lot more work to do before we launch anything very specific. I really want to just talk in concept basis today based on the data that we found. So first, this is a slide that kind of shows the timeline of where we are relative to the sales surtax. So we had the initial sales tax in 2014 that in both cases, 2014 and 2020, focused on facility renewal, educational technology, and security. We've made some great investments. We have some great projects going on. And we are today building a potential surtax renewal plan, a potential millage renewal plan. We're building our annual capital budget. You'll be probably seeing that towards the end of April, as well as our operating budget. So all these things are sort of interrelated, and I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking through the capital funding scenario for the district. So these are our three major capital sources of funding. You see there are educational facilities impact fees, sales surtax, and our local capital at 1.5 mils. And how these relate to one another and to our district capital programs is that the impact fees, those are pretty easy in that those are paid by new residential buildings. So if you're building an apartment complex, you're building a house, you pay an impact fee because you potentially will be contributing students to our school system. And so those can only be used for new capacity. So we can build classroom additions, we can build new schools. We've done very well with that, using those resources for things like a classroom addition building at Cocoa High School. We use them for a classroom addition at South Lake. We built the Vieira Middle School, Vieira Elementary School with South Area impact fees. We're looking at school additions at Westside Elementary, Bayside High School, and some additional capacity at Sunrise Elementary. So these are typically used in higher growth areas because that's where the building and development happens. What we can't use these for is anything that is a reconstruction. So we have to be adding new student stations in order to use these resources. So we cannot replace an aging building using impact fees. So our sales surtax has been defined in our both programs for renewal. So facility renewal, educational technology, and security. And there were some very specific project types that were defined in the plans of work that were put in front of the voters as part of the referendum. So even though the referendum language was pretty short, there were plans that were backstops to the referendum language, and we've been very true to what we committed to the voters to do. So it is legal to use sales surtax for rebuilds, for new builds. It is not what we told the voters we were going to do with those resources. So it's not part of our current program of work. The third source of capital investment is the 1.5 mils property tax. And that has a much broader use. We use that to pay our debt service, and that's about $38 million per year. So it's roughly a little less than half of that revenue source right now. 10 years ago, it was almost all of that revenue source, but because our property values have increased, we've had a lot more capacity to do capital investments. We use this resource for school bus purchases, technology purchases, lot of facility renewal, property insurance. And so we are using that to meet our capital needs as well as for some of our personnel expenses relating to maintenance of plant and capital project. So the big red blob on the left side of the slide indicates we have no dedicated funding source for new builds or for rebuilds. So we have aging schools. You know, in Sue's perfect world, we would be, let's start over, let's build a new building. We have no source of funding for that activity. So when we look at our long-term strategic facilities plan, it is going to be painfully clear that we do need to do some rebuilds. And so I wanted to set up a little bit of a framework as to how that might happen. And there's lots of permutations and options that the board can consider, a lot of different ways to do this. And I just wanted to kind of set the stage for that conversation. So the first half of what I'm going to talk about is all around our financial picture for the next 20-ish years. So we've been thinking about, we really need a strategic approach, right? So how are we going to do that? Like, how are we going to prioritize the projects that we need to do within some very limited resources? So, what I've been thinking about is that even though I literally could spend the entire district's budget on facilities, we don't have that luxury, right? So we've got to prioritize how we invest our money. And so our cadence of spending has been around renewal, and that's great because we have to continue to operate, but we would be much more effective if we had newer buildings. We'd have less operating expenses if we had newer buildings, but how do you transition from older buildings to newer buildings? So this slide just kind of talks a little bit about, this would be a best practice, right, to replace our assets before they reach the end of their useful life. But a lot of our buildings are functionally obsolete. We keep them running. They're in really pretty good shape because of our sales tax investments and our capital investments. Our learning environments are pretty stable. We've done a really good job with our HVAC. We've invested, top of my head, close to $200 million in air conditioning over the past 10 years. So my life used to be air conditioning's broken everywhere all the time, and it's not the situation anymore. We've really managed to get ourselves in a position where we're doing preventative maintenance, and so it's worked well. Same thing with playgrounds. We're just about at a place where our playgrounds are all within their useful lifespan. So that ideally would be the approach that we would use for our school buildings in general, but it's going to take a long time and a lot of strategic thinking to get us to that place. This is just kind of a graph I pulled off the internet that kind of shows that with any asset and buildings in particular, right, you have to keep up your maintenance. And we had a period of time with very limited maintenance, and we were literally replacing at failure. So we didn't do anything until the air conditioning broke. And by then it's kind of too late. So you can see your building attributes decline over time, especially if you are not making that investment in maintenance and in replacement and refurbishment. So this is sort of setting the stage for what WXY team is going to be talking about today. We looked at a lot of different options and a lot of different ways to prioritize our strategic facilities planning. And what it came down to is there's kind of groups of topics that we thought we would talk about together. So the first one is looking at K-8 conversions. And there are, I think, opportunities for us to both gain some new buildings and revisit our configuration to a K-8. And that might improve our competitiveness in the marketplace. Most of our charters are K-8s, and that seems to be a successful model in Brevard, and it's challenging to transition, but I think we have a few opportunities where we might want to look at that as a potential option. Also looked at opportunities to work towards more 712s. We have some very successful 712s in our district. That is another way to be a little bit more efficient with our use of building space. We can always do boundary adjustments. Those are never fun for the facilities team, but that is a way to balance our enrollment. So we have a few of those on deck to talk about, and then obviously we have some new capacity, and then there's a handful of things that don't fit neatly into those categories that we want to share with you this afternoon. So from my perspective, like this is a process, right? So we have a lot of work to do. Today's a discussion of the board's thinking on some of our longer term priorities, our strategies, things that we in facilities should be working towards so that we can deliver better buildings and better educational environments for our students on a long-term basis. But it does require a lot of community engagement. It's not just the facilities plan. So I'm going to talk about our resources in a bit more detail here. So our impact fees, we bring in about $16 million a year. About 3/4 of that is in the South District, which is south of Barnes Boulevard. So that picks up the Vieira area, Palm Bay, West Melbourne, some of our higher growth areas. And so if you look at the cadence of revenue, which admittedly is just basically what it is today, and this is a highly volatile revenue source. So it goes with the building industry. So if something happens in the economy or in Brevard in general, we don't have the building, we don't have this revenue. It is not a bondable revenue source, so it's just cash flow. And we have a intergovernmental committee structure that makes recommendations on how to spend that. It goes to the school board, and then it goes across the street to the county commission, and then we receive the revenue. So it's a process. But the point here is for a 20-year period, we might be able to do 4 to 5 projects out of this revenue source, given the cost of construction that's, admittedly very generalized, but we can't do 30 projects. We can do somewhere in the 4, 5, 6 range over that time frame. So the sales surtax, as I said, is distributed with 70% to facility renewal, 15% each to security and educational technology. This is the 2020 sales surtax program. And this slide shows you how we have invested our sales surtax since the inception of the program in 2014 through January 31st of 25. So you see we've had a very, very strong investment in our building system. So we're at 60% in HVAC, building envelope, and electrical. Our next year or two is going to be heavily weighted towards electrical and roofing systems. So those are projects that are on deck that are very expensive. So that group at the top is going to continue through the life of the 2020 program. You can also see in the purple shaded areas, those are items that were not eligible under the 2014 sales tax, but are eligible under the 2020 sales tax. So we have done a lot, we've done a fair amount of work in athletics, playgrounds, classroom conditions. So we're starting to see some improvements on the inside of the buildings as well as on some of our ancillary facilities. The 2014 program was largely invisible. It was a lot of air conditioning. We did chillers and AHUs and all of those things that nobody gets to see. What we're doing now is also something that our community can see the results of our surtax investments. So this is a dashboard that shows you the breadth of categories that we are assessing on a regular basis. Our team has taken the facility assessment work that was done back in 2019 and 2020. We've updated that data. We've converted a lot of it to a Smartsheet format, and we're able to build programs based on the condition of these assets. And this list is growing as time goes on, but I wanted you and the community to see that we really have a pretty good handle on the condition of our stuff. And we are going to be able to build really pretty solid programs based on what we see as the life cycle of each of these assets and how often we need to do replacements. This is just an example using playgrounds where we have extracted the data from our assessment database and established a useful lifespan of each of our assets, and it gives you a sense of, okay, these are the next group of playgrounds that we need to replace. And so we're actively in the process of doing that. But if you extrapolate this out for a 20-year period and across a number of categories of assets, you can really start to build a good annual program of capital investments for surtax, capital, or whatever source of revenue we may have available for us. So thinking about how we might use an extension of the surtax over time, I kind of looked at over a 20-year period, the average annual revenue is potentially about $68 million. If we stay with the allocation of 70% to facility renewal, and you look at allocating percentages to major building systems as well as ancillary facilities, you can see it pretty quickly consumes the revenue that we would project from that resource. And then on the security and the ET side, those numbers seem big, $10 million. But if you distribute that over every school, it's really not that much. And so in security and ET, the work is often distributed among all of the schools, whereas the work in facilities is a school at a time. We in facilities are rarely doing one thing at every school at the same time. So there's lots of permutations to this. This is just an example, and it really is meant to show you that we can consume the sales surtax resources on facility renewal pretty easily and make good decisions and good investment. So looking 20 years ahead, I did an example. So I thought, well, what if we looked at 70% facilities, but take 10% of that and put it towards new build? So what if we did that? So if we did that, we would end up with about $4.5 million or so a year. That's really not enough to do anything impactful. And so in order to get the numbers in the blue column bigger, the numbers in the facility renewal column have to get smaller, which means I'm doing less stuff in the renewal arena. So I'm very worried about under investing in our renewal given the age and condition of our buildings. Like, we really need to keep up the cadence of maintaining our buildings. So what I'll be recommending to you is, if the board is inclined to consider sales surtax renewal, that we would not allocate a specific percentage for renewal, but simply include in the authorizing resolution the opportunity to do that should revenues improve or costs decline or some combination of the two, as is what happened with the 2020 program. We developed a very conservative program. We've had a fair amount of revenue that is over and above what we had originally programmed, and it's allowed us to do more and better projects. And I would want to continue that same philosophy for a renewal of the surtax. Now, this actually looked at a 20-year potential time frame. The legislature has a bill in front of them at the moment that would limit the term of the sales surtax to 8 years. So that appears poised to pass, so that may be something that we'll need to consider if the board is inclined to look at a renewal, that we would be limited to 8 years. That would further limit any use of that resource for new builds. There is some language in the proposed bill around 30-year bonding, so should the board be inclined to do anything relative to financing, there's some other caveats, but that's a discussion for down the road. So this is the financial look ahead, and again, I'm just doing some basic estimating, assuming about a 2.5% increase in property values of our local capital resources, extracting the charter school share, and then looking at the balance that's available for use in our district. And again, we're at about $70 million right about now. About 38 of that is for debt service. We use about 10 for property insurance. And so the balance is what we use for school buses and technology and facility renewal. So I have looked at this in the sense that in 32, we start to partially retire our debt, and in 36, I believe, we fully retire our debt. And so we will have some capacity for resources in the out years that we don't currently have. So if we're looking at a cash flow scenario, my recommendation is we start to plan for some major projects that are 4, 5, 6 years out. And when you see the range of options, it's going to take us a year or two to get through those options and what the priorities are, so that we can make good decisions and pick out the top 3, 4, 5 projects that we want to do that are big game-changing projects in our district. So bottom line, classroom additions, new schools, impact fees, sales tax. I would recommend to you that if we are looking at renewing the sales surtax, we do something similar to what we have now, but expand the potential use for rebuilds. And then plan to use the capacity created in the local capital, created by the retirement of our debt service, for planning some new build projects. I just want to make a quick caveat. As we were working on this, realized that we have a lot of schools that have older buildings and newer buildings, and we have to go through a process with the Florida Department of Education in order to raise a building. And so it's not as easy as we're going to just replace X school with the new school. We actually have to go through a process to retire a school building with the DOE. And that it's doable, but because we have some campuses that have newer and older buildings, we'll have to think about that a little bit more closely as well. And then based on the board's direction, I think one of the next most important steps is community engagement, both generally and then around any of the specific recommendations the board may have for us. And I think that is where I turn this over to Dare Brawley, who is our project manager from WXY.
Mr.
Let's
Chair,
check if that's.
can I just ask a question on this? Just out of curiosity, what's your projection if we were not to renew the sales surtax? What's the, how important is that to what you've just provided?
It is absolutely critically important to what I've just provided. Mr. Thomas, thank you for asking.
Thank you.
I have one quick question too, sorry. Have we done any type of impact fee study in comparison for Brevard County and our surrounding counties? Or where do we rank?
So we are much lower than our surrounding counties. The impact fees are actually enacted by the county commission.
Right.
They are probably coming up on a new impact fee study timeframe relatively soon, because it has been a while.
Okay.
So our rates are pretty low. They're probably about a quarter of what the cost is. Like if you were actually to cover the cost, because so much time has gone on and costs have increased so much, ours are pretty low.
Okay, and does the school board typically initiate the ask of the county commission to do that study, or is that something that they do on their own?
It's usually something they would do on their own. We could ask, so
Okay.
that is something that if you all are interested in us doing a little deeper dive into it, we can do that and start those conversations with our counterparts across the street.
Okay, I think it's worth exploring, board, but that will be your call. Thank you.
Okay, great. And that's on, correct? Seems like it. Thank you so much, Ms. Han, and members of the school board. It's wonderful to see you all again. We're going to be sharing some updates and findings based on our work so far to develop strategies as part of this long-term strategic facilities plan for BPS schools. In the material that WXY will share today that we have produced in coordination with Sarah Lee Morrissey of Sarah Lee Morrissey Consulting, we're going to provide some additional context for the importance and also the real opportunity in doing this work now. We'll share insights that we've received from preliminary community engagement that we've conducted so far, and then we'll share our approach to developing possible strategies for inclusion in a plan. Really, we're here to present those for your consideration, and then later for consideration by the Brevard community and the district overall. So this work has been grounded in a kind of vision statement that we set in coordination with the district in the fall. Really trying to anchor this work in seeking to ensure that we are supporting excellent 21st century learning environments in Brevard for all students in the district through an effective use of resources. So I want to just have that as a backbone of how we've been approaching this work so far. I will turn it over to my colleague Sarah Lee Morrissey, who will share more about kind of why now, what's the significance of this work.
All right, good afternoon. This is working. Okay. Good afternoon. It's good to see you all again. Yeah. It's, you know, the benefit of a long-term strategic plan for facilities is that one, as you know, or at least those of you who've been on the board for a little while, takes a long time to get from whatever facility idea you may have to actual implementation. There's a number of steps, process, and many points of decision-making that occur before that time that the idea becomes something that you choose to implement, becomes something that actually ends up being physical in time and space. So the benefit of this particular plan for you is that it is giving you a very long look, certainly a longer look at some issues, potential trends, past trends, what's happening in the future as it relates to enrollment, but also some issues associated with facilities conditions, and it's giving you the time to contemplate and think about that information as it relates to your facilities. I want to emphasize, both for you all as well as anyone who is listening to this presentation, that there are no decisions as a part of today's presentation, and even potential decisions that you may be interested in making. I suspect that any idea that comes forward today, any of the strategies, still require considerable detail, analysis. Both Sue and Derek have mentioned, and we'll discuss further, about community engagement, stakeholder input. So this is for information, to provoke some thinking, ask some questions, and give you some things that perhaps you'll think about, maybe not tonight, but if it's very compelling, hopefully. But things that you'll want to think through as you move forward with not just capital budgeting this year, but as you contemplate a lot of the decisions in your future. One last thing I do want to mention for you all, because I think it's important to hear good things about your staff. Sue mentioned the dashboard assessment that Brevard Public Schools has. This happened a while ago. She led a conversation with facility districts across our state, many of whom have a lot of new folks, younger people without a school facility background, and really mentored and gave forth so much good information about how Brevard is implementing facility assessment data and how critical it is for you to make your priority and budgeting decisions. And I really wanted to take a moment and commend her and let you know that you're lucky.
She's the best, we know.
In case you didn't know. Okay, so we want to move forward and just put a little bit of context around some data points as it relates to both enrollments as well as facility conditions. I know you all go to a lot of different meetings where you see some of your colleagues, other school board members, and I think it's good information for you to know how you sit relative to your other school districts. And everybody has their own issues. No one is quite the same, but this shows you your traditional school enrollment along with Central Florida, what I consider, some of whom are relatively comparable. Others are, larger and others smaller. Growth rates are different. But you can see how your traditional school enrollment is compared to your fellow districts. And then percent charter school enrollment. Brevard is at 13%. Statewide, 14%, so you're right there where the state is. In terms of how you relate specifically, and the reason we pull out charter school enrollment is because it's a little bit of a tug on where we see students moving and how it relates to some of the conversations we want to have with utilization and enrollment trends. You can see that you have considerably more charter schools and enrollment than Seminole and Volusia, but not nearly the charter school enrollment as Osceola, Lake, or Polk. And you're very comparable to Pasco. And Pasco is a suburban county just north, a little bit northeast of Tampa. So let's look at growth and, why do we show a change in population from 1990 to 2020? That's a 30-year period. It's pretty significant. But when we're talking about the life of facilities, if they're constructed well, have a long life, right? Generally, the rule of thumb tends to be about 50 years, plus or minus, again, depending on the era they were built, the materials used, and the quality of construction. So, and as we know, here in Brevard, you all had a huge boom when the space industry came. So your 60s through your 80s were really big decades for you. And that's when you did a lot of construction, new school construction. In the 30 years that we're showing here, you can see a very relatively stable, but positive growth rate for total population at 1.7. And you can see how that varies. Again, Brevard and Volusia, very similar. But look at Osceola, which of course is right outside Disney. Huge growth rate at 8.7%. But more important is our market, population under 18. That period between 1990 and 2020 has been relatively slow here in Brevard. Things did slow down, and you can see how that relates to your neighbors. Again, very, very comparable to Volusia, Seminole as well, but you can see some of the others, again, particularly Osceola at 7.8%, considerably higher growth rate. And for the Florida statewide, we've got 1.5%, which I would consider a pretty nice, stable, we can deal with that growth rate. All right, so what's happened since 2020, let's take a closer look. So what we have here is the change in our population under 18 since 2015. Like, let's get past the Great Recession. All school districts in Florida all lost considerable enrollment. So let's take that out and see what's happening. You can see that Brevard's gone up from that 0.8 by a couple of tenths of a percent, as also have several of the other districts. The Seminole has dropped considerably since that time, and Seminole is getting pretty close to being built out. So they're really it's a much smaller district geographically, and I think you all know the challenges of having a large geographic district. But really, other than Brevard, the only other district that has shown growth in this 2015 to 2023 period that is greater than that 30-year period is Polk, by about the same 0.3%. Now, you know, we were hit by the pandemic in 2020, 2021, and again, many districts saw some declines, so we took a real quick look at, well, what's happened since that period of time. And we presented some data to you at the December presentation that breaks out the change in traditional enrollment here in Brevard and charter schools. Overall, together, since 2020, you can see a positive annual growth rate of 0.9%. So again, that's going back to being something similar to that 1990 to 2020. But if you take a closer look, and I'm going to call your attention to the last 2 years. And the reason I call your attention to the last 2 years, and it's not on this screen, is if you remember in the 2023 legislature, they adopted House Bill 1. And House Bill 1 expanded the use of the state's scholarship program or voucher program, however you want to refer to that, expanded the use of it, removed all income thresholds, and made those dollars available for any kind of private school and any kind of homeschooling resources. So what we have seen in the last 2 years where that legislation has been effective is we've seen a real change in our enrollment trend here in Brevard, in that the traditional school enrollment has dropped in those 2 years by about 1.7%, and the charter growth, it's still a positive, but it has slowed considerably. So one point that I want to make to you, you know, for 2 years it's hard to call it a trend. I would not call it a trend yet. But because that's pretty significant numbers and stats, and more importantly, implications, I would caution you to keep looking at that as we move forward to see how that may be impacting all of our schools, both charter and traditional. All right, so let's move on to facility conditions. Sue's been very pointed in some of her commentaries, so this is information that y'all are very familiar with. You do have old schools, many going back to the period of the 1960s and even earlier. So Brevard's average facility age is 41 years, whereas the statewide average is 34 years. And certainly across the Central Florida districts, you've got the oldest stock, with Volusia and Lake coming in not too far behind. Osceola, again, Osceola has grown so much in such a relatively short period and recent period, and they have such a high charter enrollment, that would account for why they have a relatively young facility age of 21. Utilization. You'll see a lot more about this. I know we pointed it out in December, and we're going to discuss it some more today. Utilization is basically the enrollment at the school divided by capacity. This happens to be both your permanent and relocatable capacity because we were looking at it across all of these districts, and the data available to us is through DOE in the work plan. But it gives you an idea of whether or not you're optimizing the use of your schools, because you're paying for utilities as well as all kinds of maintenance, regardless of how many students are there, as well as your traditional overhead like labor. So Brevard is at 69%, which is the lowest utilization across the neighboring districts, with, again, Volusia not too far behind at 73%. Big issue that we want to call to your attention, and you'll see a lot of as we move forward, is schools with utilizations under 60%, because these are what we really consider not well utilized at all, and things that we should be looking at as to how can we improve the utilization. And you have 25% of your schools, a quarter of your stock is with utilizations under 60%. A lot of that may be that pool associated with people making different decisions and going to charters and or other types of school. But another piece of it can be the change over time in our neighborhoods, right? We see a lot of growth within the Viera and South part of Brevard, our newer neighborhoods. But you're a very big county, you have a lot of neighborhoods, a lot of schools. Things are changing in those older neighborhoods. Again, you can see the difference. Seminole's doing really, really well. I'll just say I think it's easy for them to do well when they're such a tight geographic, a smaller, compact district. Volusia's at 13%, and everybody else is kind of hovering around there, although Polk is getting pretty close to the same as Brevard with 19%. Sue spent some time, I thought really, really good information and a lot of details associated with how you're spending capital. But I want to remind you the pie doesn't change, but pieces within the pie have changed. And in particular, when we think about, again, the life of a facility, how has it changed for you all and the need to prioritize? You saw that out of your sales tax revenue, you're dedicating 15% to security and 15% to technology. Those two line items didn't used to be here, decades ago. Those are relatively new line items. Certainly security, what we've been spending on security over the last 10 years is considerably significant. But for the last 20 years is really when those two line items started to become regular line items in our capital budgets. But they compete with everything else for the same pie. So here's a good look at how your capital expenditures, and this is just for the last 4 years, what those look like on a per student basis based on the age of your facility. And there's no surprise here. Perhaps the surprise is just the number. $5,900 per student for facility maintenance, renewal, however you want to term it, for your facilities over 60 years old. Makes total sense. These are very old facilities. They need a lot of TLC to continue to be used, to continue to be safe. And you can see how that compares to the younger school facilities. It's pretty much double. And this does not include any dollars spent on capacity additions. So this is just sales tax and LCIF dollars. And then looking again at school utilization, you can see here for schools that are less than 60% utilized, you're spending over $8,000 per student on in capital. Again, this is just for the last 4 years, which is about twice the amount for those schools that are over 80% utilized. And I would say 80% is a nice target to get at. Gives you some breathing room. We know that some programs, some programs require more space than DOE may recognize, but I think it's a good target. And then lastly, for this section, very similar slide to what you might have seen in December, taking a look at utilization based on permanent capacity across our traditional schools. And what I'd call your attention to is purple, which dark purple is less than 60% and light purple is 60 to 80%. That is 42 schools over, what we're showing here is using our Brevard County School District projections, enrollment projections over the next 4 years. So you've got 42 schools in that. And then if you look at the orange colors, in particular, the schools that are over 105%, right? So these are pretty much your schools that are in your growth areas. It goes from 4 schools to 9 schools. So increasing what's happening at utilizations over 105% and kind of staying stable for those that are considered underutilized.
Super. So with that as a kind of data-driven backdrop and context for this work, we're going to share out a bit of what we've heard so far in the initial community engagement that we've conducted in our work to date, really as part of this baseline analysis work. So this was conducted over the winter and included an online survey that was open to the full district community. This was advertised by BPS on the website, via social media, and I believe also went out via text blast to parents and families in the district. And we also held 5 small group discussions with groups that are active in the Brevard school communities. We were really pleased to see this level of engagement with a community survey just at this kind of initial research stage of this process. Really heartening to see the engagement and interest in the community in engaging with this work. We had almost 2,000 responses. This represented schools from across the district. We had respondents from every single BPS traditional school. The number of respondents varied somewhat by school, but we were really pleased to see that distribution. Most of the folks who responded were parents to this survey. So through both the survey and the small group conversations, we heard from folks about their experiences with Brevard public school facilities, and I'll share out some quotes and kind of summarize findings from those conversations with you all. We heard about the challenges related to facility conditions associated with aging schools in a number of these conversations and in comments and responses to the survey questions. Heard from folks about challenges related to systems in need of upgrades, classrooms whose sizes and configurations are outdated and not well suited to the needs of 21st century learning environments, small group activities, project-based learning, classrooms that were not designed with those kind of educational models in mind. As well, we heard about the kind of uneven condition of schools across the district, as well as an appreciation on the part of community members for the challenges that the Brevard Public School Facilities team faces in needing to maintain such a diverse range of school building types and then also specific facilities within schools. We also heard a desire for more and better kind of specialized facilities spaces, some of the types of spaces that kind of make for, are especially relevant at the upper grade levels around sports fields and performing arts spaces, a real desire to improve and make these spaces that really are wonderful for students and a kind of need there. We also heard about some of the challenges that facility condition can have on kind of morale and the challenges that older facilities pose to the new kinds of school security requirements that are in place today that weren't there previously.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a question? All right, sorry, I don't mean to interject, but I just want to, I have to ask this question because I am on the board and I'm also a parent of an enrolled student in BPS schools. The survey that was available, can you talk a little bit about that? Because I don't feel like that was made available to every single parent. So can you share with how that was disseminated out to the community? Because I, like I said, as a board member and a parent, didn't see the opportunity to fill this survey out or I would have done so. So can you share that with the board?
Yeah, absolutely. We shared the link and it went live when we were here last in December and announced that during this meeting. And the link was live in a banner on the BPS website for the month of December until from December 12th.
You got it?
Through the
Focus?
end of January. And then it went out via text, I think 2 times was my understanding, and also was posted on social media.
Okay, all right, well then I need to follow up and find out why I didn't get any notification about it. Thank you.
I will say, I think, obviously the 2,000 responses, that's a large number of responses to have through an online survey about a research project about facilities, but that's not the whole district. And that's really the very first moment of community engagement that have done in a kind of district-wide context, and it's the first of what will need to be many more. So absolutely want to underscore that.
Thank you.
Great. Just a couple of photos from site visits that Sarah Lee and I took with Dave and team in December, as well as hearing about some of the challenges that folks experience in BPS schools and in relation to facilities. We also heard, both through the survey and in the small group stakeholder conversations, some ideas from community members about what types of strategies the district might consider to address some of these challenges. So these are a couple of quotes and summarized notes from those initial conversations and survey responses. We heard from folks about some of the kind of suggestions around balancing enrollment through boundary changes potentially, as well as considerations of possible opportunities for replacing and consolidating facilities. A suggestion that's a direct quote from one survey respondent that was kind of echoed in a number of representative comments, but this is just one, calling out a potential example of removing an old middle school and elementary school and replacing that with one bigger K-8 school. So we'll talk more about strategies as we get further on, but we were really interested to see both concrete specific suggestions from the community as well as a kind of general willingness to look at the challenges at hand and think about what are the types of strategies that can meaningfully impact them. So with that as the kind of backdrop, both the comparisons with relevant peer districts and what we've heard so far in the very initial community engagement, I'll move into talking about some of our approach to developing the set of ideas that we're here to bring forth for discussion. So this has been grounded in the work that we presented in December, considering 3 kind of pillars of excellence as it relates to educational facilities, looking at enrollment, facilities, and programs. This is the kind of grounding and brought us through our approach here. In relation to those kind of 3 pillars, we look at key challenges as they impact individual schools in the district through 3 kind of key lenses, looking at the capture rate of schools. This refers to, for BPS traditional boundary schools, what percentage of the students who are zoned to attend that school choose to attend that school. We consider that as a kind of measure of the attractiveness of the programs that the school offers and its educational offerings. We look also at facility condition. That's a kind of one-to-one map on the facilities side. And then at school utilization, thinking about enrollment overall. we have developed specific strategic goals that are designed to address each of those specific challenges, optimizing resources, raising enrollment, renovating aging facilities. And then each of those strategic goals can be accomplished potentially through potential strategies, some of which are policy focused, things like boundary changes, some of which are capital intensive, like rebuilds or new facilities, and others that are hybrid, that involve elements of both. So I'll walk through kind of a number of stages of these, kind of building up what has been our thinking behind some of these potential strategies. So this is a kind of another view of the same diagram that was on the previous slide. So let's take an individual school as an example. We looked at all of the schools across the BPS system through the lenses of these three pillars: facilities, enrollment, and programs. We're looking at key challenges related to whether the facility is in good or poor condition, whether it's over well-utilized or underutilized from an enrollment standpoint, and then whether it has a high or low capture rate. These map on to strategic goals around renovating aging schools, optimizing resources, and raising enrollment. And again, these are the policy-focused, hybrid, and capital-intensive types of strategies, and how this all kind of fits together. So have taken an approach of really data-driven decision-making, informed both by community input as well as kind of key indicators describing the school challenges that can help inform recommendations. And so we'll run through kind of what are the conditions in which each of these types of strategies might be applied or considered by the district. So first off, new programs and choice options. These are strategies that would aim to try to increase enrollment and utilization through program expansion. This can be about creating more choice options within the school system in an attempt to attract more students to the BPS system who are currently outside of it. One note here is that these strategies can also, creating new choice schools, for example, can also draw students from other BPS traditional schools and should be kind of considered together with other strategies. Boundary changes. This is one set of strategies that can be used to adjust boundaries between schools where there's really high differences in utilizations in neighboring schools. An overutilized school immediately next to an underutilized school. Are there opportunities to better balance enrollment between those two? Grade configuration changes. Another potential strategy to look at both utilization changes for schools within at consecutive levels within the same feeder pattern where there are high differences in enrollment between school levels. Consolidations and repurposings for community benefit. These are strategies that the district might consider in cases where there are many underutilized schools and there aren't other good strategies to balance those enrollments through boundary changes or other mechanisms. Are there opportunities to take a school that's underutilized and bring it into a new beneficial use for the district? As well, thinking about opportunities to rebuild and consolidate. Are there multiple older, underutilized schools in poor condition that are very close by to one another, where there would be an opportunity to bring two schools together into a new school building, providing a kind of better experience for schools, for students in multiple schools. As well, new capacity, as is mentioned, there are some areas of real enrollment growth in the county where new capacity, creating new seats, it will definitely still be something that the district needs to consider in those areas that are expected to experience real enrollment growth. And then finally, opportunities to potentially rebuild schools that are well utilized, have high capture rates, but are really aging and in poor condition. So I'll turn it over to Sarah Lee to speak about this more specifically. But all of these are kind of in the abstract. How might, what are the types of strategies that we might use to apply to the different types of challenges that we're seeing? All of this is constrained by fiscal realities. And we'll talk a little bit about what are some of the possible ways to implement this in conjunction with available resources.
Thanks there. So this graphic is, dollars over time, dollars that you all collect over time. And generally, the green bar reflects your impact fees, which is, I would say, your most restrictive revenue source for capital, because it can only go towards new capacity. So even in these instances where we talk about a rebuild, and that theoretically can be discussed as new capacity, it's replacement. And if it's replacing like for like, we have a school, they have 750 student stations, and we're rebuilding 750 student stations, that would not qualify for the use of impact fees. If you were rebuilding that 750 student school, and just for the sake of an example, you were choosing to increase the capacity, let's just say 750 to 1,000. That difference is new capacity, and theoretically that difference could be funded with impact fees. But it is, I would say, your most restrictive fund source from a capital standpoint. And of course, you're dependent on the county commission to impose it and collect it. Purple reflects your other capital fund sources. We've talked about LCIF, which is that 1.5 mil on folks' property tax. And Sue mentioned that 38 million a year is being used to pay debt service. So until that debt is paid off, you really don't have much available. But the intent of this graphic shows, you can see that that purple revenue source begins to increase and become more available once the debt decreases and is entirely paid off. And so what does that mean as you look forward, and what could we do? Unless this graphic is just intended to show, oh, this money collects year after year after year, and then we spend it. So you see here shown fiscal year 32, that green bar, which is your impact fee revenue, goes down because you saved some money over 4 years, impact fees, and now you decided we're gonna build a new school and we're gonna pay for it with our impact fees. Now it goes down because you're using it up. And it'll start climbing again, and then you'll have enough, you'll be able to do something else. Sue, in her presentation, said, 4 schools, maybe 5, depends on what you build, depends what we're collecting, and it depends how much everything costs. We're not making any projections today about what anything is going to cost or if things will stay the same, but for the purposes of illustration. And then the same holds true for that purple bar, which, remember, that purple bar is dependent in part on whether or not you renew your sales tax, right? Because your sales tax can be available for any of the things that we're discussing today. Certainly, again, as that debt is paid off, you have considerably more money by which you can look at your priorities and consider how you want to do that. So again, the purpose of this graphic is just to show you how this is a pay-as-you-go kind of scenario. This is assuming no debt. Pay as you go, we save up some money, then that enables us to do something. You might change some of your priorities, and these things could shift slightly, but gives you a general idea. And so overall, what does that mean? Well, maybe it means 6 rebuilds in whatever form you choose, and 3 quote-unquote new schools. Again, just an idea, because nothing stays constant, but so that you have an idea of what you can consider as you move forward.
Great. So with that as the kind of orders of magnitude in mind of the, scale of the types of capital intensive strategies that the board and the district might consider, moving into discussing specific potential strategies for consideration by the board and discussion and further conversation. So we have worked with the district to assemble potential strategies into these 5 different strategy groups, strategy types. Of K-8 conversions and 7 through 12 potential conversions, as Sue mentioned earlier. These both would include, grade configuration changes and rebuilding and consolidating, kind of bringing those 2 strategy types together to think about new configurations for grades in schools, new capacity projects, new capacity, boundary adjustments, boundary changes, and then a kind of other category that holds a couple of specific ideas related to new programs and choice options, opportunities for consolidations and repurposings, and opportunities to rebuild schools potentially. So I'll move into each of these groupings specifically, starting off with the possibility for thinking about K-8 conversions and whether the district is interested in moving in a direction of having a greater number of K-8 schools in the district. We have identified through our work a number of different kind of clusters of schools where the district might consider this set of strategies for further evaluation. So these 7 groupings of schools, Group A includes University Park, Palm Bay Elementary School, Port Malabar Elementary, and Stone Middle School. Group B includes Croton and Creel Elementary Schools and Johnson Middle School. Group C includes Mila, Tropical, and Audubon Elementary Schools, and Jefferson Middle on Merritt Island. Group C1 are the 2 choice schools, Stevenson Elementary and Edgewood Junior Senior High School, that are proximate to that grouping. Oak Park Elementary and Mims Elementary, together with Madison Middle, are in Group D. And then Group E includes Gulfview, Saturn, and Anderson Elementary Schools, as well as McNair and Kennedy Middle Schools. Group F includes Indy Atlantic and Gemini Elementary School and Hoover Middle School. So you'll see that in kind of overall across the schools in this full set of groupings, the utilization is about 65%. So many of these schools are schools on the kind of lower end of the utilization spectrum in the district. Their capture rates vary, but the average is 63%. And the average age of this set of schools is 60 years old. So these are some of the older facilities in the district. FCI stands for Facility Condition Index, which together with facility age helps to kind of indicate the condition of facilities. Yes.
Okay, yeah, really quick,
Absolutely.
before everybody who's seeing this for the first time, it's not our first time,
Yeah.
is flipping out.
Yeah.
I just want to ask a question. So like, for example, in this first box,
Yep.
you're not necessarily, when we start getting the details, looking at taking all 3 of those elementary schools and a middle school and combining them, just that
No, ma'am.
those would be the elementary schools that would be impacted by this. Because that would be quite a large school. So that's just so everybody's
Absolutely.
looking at it for the first time. We're
Absolutely.
not talking about combining everything in the color block into
No.
one school, but that
No.
that's where they would draw from, correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, so these are, potential groupings of schools that are proximate to one another, where there are differences in enrollment between them, and or schools that are kind of underutilized or where there's excess space that could accommodate some of these. So I'll also say, and to reiterate, as Ms. Hahn has mentioned earlier and we've said throughout, all of these, this is the kind of first stage of sharing these ideas. Every single one of these groupings would need further in-depth study, in-depth engagement with the community to kind of learn, is this feasible? If so, where does it make the most sense? And kind of what is the interest or not in these proposals. So just kind of bringing this to a district-wide view, just to emphasize that we're looking at schools really across the district, where some of these strategies might make sense, but between schools at the middle and elementary level. Yeah.
And I want to add one, these strategies and clusters, they are only being proposed as a consideration using the metrics that we're identifying to you today. If any of the clusters were something that warranted further study, there's other disciplines besides facilities, in addition to our communities, that you would want to hear from. Like how would converting to a K impact the curriculum that we currently offer in 2 separate grade configurations? What would that mean? So, and special programs.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving to the kind of second kind of grouping of potential strategies is exploring whether expanding the number of 7 through 12 schools in the district might be another possible promising approach to better balancing enrollment and addressing kind of facility condition issues across the county. So for kind of consideration as part of this potential strategy grouping, we have 5 different pairs of schools that could merit further conversation as to whether or not developing a 7 through 12 school where in the place of current middle and high school configuration might be a good idea. Grouping A includes Satellite High School and Delora Middle School. Grouping B, O'Galley High School and Johnson Middle School. Grouping C, Astronaut High School and Madison Middle School. Group D, Palm Bay High and Stone Middle. C and E, Jefferson Middle and Merritt Island High School. So again, in this grouping, we see an average facility age across all 10 of these schools of 60 years. These are some of the older schools, again, in the county. Capture rates are generally higher. The capture rates, students opt to attend the traditional BPS schools for high school grades at a really high rate. That's a real strength of the county. So see that the capture rates are generally speaking higher, and that the average utilization across all of the schools in this grouping is at about 65%. So looking at this geographically, these are the kind of potential clusters for conversation. Moving into our next kind of groupings of potential strategies are places where there might be opportunities to address utilization challenges through potential boundary adjustments. In this grouping, we have 4 potential clusters that could be considered further for possible boundary adjustments between them. In Group A, and there's a little bit of overlap between Group A and Group B, but Group A includes Williams, Manatee, Quest, Vieira, and Suntree elementary schools. Group B includes Suntree, Sherwood, Longleaf, Croton, and Creel. Group C includes Port Malabar, Columbia, Jupiter, Sunrise, Turner, and Westside, and D, Riviera and Lockmar. So looking within these groups, you can see in the middle column, which looks at the utilization between schools. For example, between Riviera and Lockmar, Riviera is at 105% of its permanent capacity currently with its enrollment as of the fall of this year, whereas Lockmar right next door is at 64%. So this is an example, and they both have relatively similar capture rates of 55% and 57%. So this is a kind of situation where if you adjusted the boundaries between those 2 schools, you really might be able to address that overutilization at Riviera by bringing some of those students into Lockmar where there seems to be available seats. So that's kind of the principle behind these groupings for boundary adjustments. And again, looking at where these are geographically. And then the next grouping is areas in the county where new capacity is already kind of under consideration. The first grouping, these three schools at the top, Bayside High School, Westside Elementary, and Sunrise Elementary, already have capacity plans underway that Sue and her team have been working on over this past year plus. As well as the separate day school in the north area. So these are kind of new capacity projects that are underway, have already had ongoing conversations. And at the bottom portion of the chart, these are schools that fall within areas that may have future development and so need to be monitored and kind of have ongoing consideration as to whether these are some of the areas that may need new capacity projects in the future. So looking at that geographically, these are areas in the kind of southern portion of the county more generally, but also some capacity in Pinewood Elementary. And again, the kind of hatched areas are really, this is a long-range strategic facilities plan. These are further out possibilities, but things that the district, when working on a long-range plan, should be considering proactively. And then the last grouping is kind of a couple of other strategies that fall outside of those four main groups. This includes thinking about new programs, and in particular, exploring opportunities at Palm Bay High School for partnerships with Adult Ed, Florida Tech, and L3 Harris, considering conversion of this school to a technical center modeled after the Clear Lake Education Center approach that has been successful. As well in this group, a consideration of possible consolidations between Cape View and Roosevelt, as well as between McNair Middle School and Kennedy Middle School. These are both conditions of two adjacent schools at the same school level that both have low utilizations and older facilities. So are ones that the district might consider kind of outside of grade configuration changes. Finally, kind of two other kind of policy-related and kind of district-wide potential strategies that the board and the district could consider. First is kind of adopting a strategy to try to phase out the use of portables and replace that with permanent capacity in schools that have kind of the need for additional seats. And then finally is to think about a range of strategies involving on the curricular side and outreach, bolstering enrollment at early grades to help kind of bring families into the BPS system in kindergarten and pre-K so that they stay within BPS schools moving forward. So I think with that, I will turn it back over.
So I'm just going to wrap up a little bit with some next steps and also ask Dara to talk about our community engagement strategies. But when we conclude our presentation, we're really looking for some guidance from the board, some ideas on priorities, thoughts on some of the strategies, thoughts on the financial framework. But I also do want to say this is not an exclusive list. Like, there are other ideas. We heard a few ideas at the community meeting last night, some different grade configurations or some boundary changes relating to McNair. Like, there are other strategies that can be on the table. We also look at boundary changes annually, so there may be some things that come up annually as part of our normal process. But these are some of the big rocks that I think are worthy of consideration if we're looking at long-term planning for big, impactful projects. And so our next step really is going to be around some community engagement, and I'm going to ask Dara to kind of give us some detail on what we've got on deck through WXY.
Thank you. Yeah, so as part of the current scope of work for WXY, as part of the strategic facilities plan, are holding virtual district-wide community meetings to hear from folks, to share out the work that we've done, and also hear from folks about their priorities, concerns, and ideas for the direction that the district should take. So as you've seen, this work is at a high level. It's strategic and district-wide, not drilling down yet into kind of specific issues and the really important individual unique contexts of individual schools. Likewise, the kind of community engagement at this stage would be big picture and district-wide. Some of the goals that we would have for this engagement are that folks come away with an understanding of this process and why it's important, that they come away with an understanding of the challenges related to facilities that the district faces, that folks have an understanding of potential strategies on the table that the district and board might be able to consider to address some of those challenges. And then very importantly, that folks in the district-wide community can provide input about potential strategies on the table, including their priorities, concerns, and important context that they want the district and the board to have about their school communities in thinking about these decisions. And then, finally, to kind of understand the range of priorities and concerns that exist across the district. So again, the kind of structure of these would be district-wide meetings held virtually at times that work well for families and engaged constituents in the district. They can have polling and interactive facilitation, group-wide question and answer sessions fielded potentially by WXY as well as members of the district, and could also include breakout group discussion, so chances for folks online to have smaller facilitated conversations around the issues that have come up. In tandem with the virtual community meetings that we can hold kind of as part of this stage of work on the strategic facilities plan, our team has a track record of developing online tools that help to both communicate information through data about the district, utilization, capture rate, all of the things that you've seen today on a school-by-school level, through a website where folks can look up their address, see which school is their zone to attend if they don't already know, and learn kind of what are the kind of key data points related to these challenges, and what are some of the potential strategies that could address those challenges. The website can include kind of comment function, so we can hear in a really direct way kind of survey input on those specific strategies, and can also include another round of kind of community questionnaire or another survey.
So I had asked WXY to pause on the development of the community engagement work until we got through today. So we want to customize our community engagement program based on the directions and guidance that we received from the board today. But these are some of our next steps from a staff perspective. We'll be doing kind of start with community engagement, working on those priorities that the board has directed us to look at and start to do some analysis. And then eventually we would like to actually draft a strategic plan document. So we'd like to finish, this is where we're going over the next 5, 10, 15 years. Concurrently, we in facilities are working on the draft sales tax renewal plan so that we can present that to the board and the community coming up here in the next few months. So you all have plenty of time to think about that issue coming up here next year, and then draft a resolution for implementation based on some of the guidance that you will give us once you take a look at the program of work that we will propose. And then, as you know, the millage also is renewable in 2026, so there's ongoing work in that arena as well. So these are kind of 3 big things that are in the facilities realm or tangential to the facilities realm that will be part of the board's consideration over the next couple of months. So I appreciate the extra time today. I know it's taken a long time to go through all this, but it's pretty detailed and significant work and has some big impacts on our community and our future with facilities. So thank you very much. And with that, we are done with our presentation.
Well, I would like to say thank you for all the effort and everything that's going in. I know we're not done yet. It was a lot. I know we've had these presentations on one-on-one for the first time for the public here. It is packed with information. So we really appreciate it. So, and to pick up where you started, we do appreciate Suhan and everything that she's done, and she's irreplaceable to this facility, that's for sure. So thank you, Sue. Board, do we want to start with any questions? John?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me echo Mr. Trent's comments. I know it's been a lot of work, and we very much appreciate it. It's something that probably should have been, Sue inherited it, but probably should have been done a long time ago, and hopefully we'll never have to do it again to this extent. So, would you like us to make comments as far as the overall presentation and kind of what we see for direction?
Yes, sir, we'd be interested to hear what your thoughts are on all of these topics.
Okay, well, in no particular order, I would like to ask the staff to explore rebuilding Stone Middle School and the K-8 conversion model with University Park. And in that, I know that nobody would like to take on new debt, but I would also like to explore all funding options, including financing possibilities. That's first and foremost for me. Number two, I know it's painful, but I think it'd be worth exploring the boundary adjustment for Riviera and Lockmore. That seems to make sense. For new capacity, I just had a quick question because I noticed there was nothing, I mentioned it in our last meeting, about the potential growth out to in west of West Melbourne, which is going to be Melbourne. Is that there's nothing that's imminent for the next 20 years, it seems to be, that we need to be looking at?
So it will be as part of kind of that southwest Palm Bay area. Both of that area is growing in Palm Bay and in West Melbourne and Melbourne, that whole corridor basically along the parkway, and the timing of that will depend on whether that's faster than what's going on at the St. John's Heritage Parkway interchange, kind of the southeast section.
Mhm.
So those two areas in general, yes. So what you're asking is included in what we were looking at.
Okay, I just didn't notice anything that was really prevalent in that study about it, so that's why I was asking. And then the last thing was, I think it would be smart to explore opportunities at Palm Bay High School, just to know what our options are. I love what's going on at Clear Lake and the plan there, but I do think that for the CTE portion, but I think that that's, for people on the South Brevard area, getting up to Clear Lake is going to be a challenge. So I think if we could use Palm Bay High School more effectively for people in South Brevard, I think that'd be very wise. And those would be my comments for now.
Great. We just want to go to Skip.
Sure. All right. Wow. And this is not our first time seeing any of this, but putting it all together was a lot, and I echo the thanks to all of you. I'm just going to go in order where I was dog-earing things. If I can find my dog ears, excuse me. Because you wanted us to talk about financial things, and I had made a couple notes, so I'm not far back enough. So understanding our limitations and everything, I just wanted to add one more potential source of income that's one-time funds. If we go forward with some of these options, we will have potential sales of property. I know sometimes when we close buildings, we don't sell it, we repurpose it, we turn it into the next office space. But if we move forward with, for example, consolidating Capeview and Roosevelt, that is beachside property, and there's a potential there. There's not too many places where we can do that, but the other one that came to mind is if we do the consolidation of the new K-8 model with University Park and Stone, then we've got University Park property right there in the backyard of Florida Tech. So it's not going to raise $50 million potentially, but that is another small source of income to help subsidize some of these projects, I believe. And we have, since I've been on the board, been selling bits and pieces, including some property that's not usable for anything that we would do in different corners. And thank you to your team who've been able to help us accomplish that. $1 million here, $1 million there. It helped in the facilities budget. So, but just thought of that as another small thing. Not enough to build a whole school, but it'll help. I just wanted to address one thing on the facilities assessment dashboard. I was on the board in 2019 when you guys used a third party to do that, and I asked that question of Sue and just said, hey, are we going to do that again? And first of all, I very much appreciate, after walking through that with me, that we're doing this in-house because, one, it was appropriate to do that. It was the right thing to do at the time because it was overwhelming and we hadn't done it. But considering that our facilities staff has been doing that to constantly update it and not wait till now 2025 and let's do it all again, but you guys have been steadily, so that we know in real time what is the state of all of our stuff. I very much appreciate that. And so since that has become the norm now for us to regularly update our things from playgrounds to basketball, literally the basketball goals, not just the courts. I mean, everything, scoreboards, things like that. We're doing it regularly. I very much appreciate that because it's a cost savings, but it's also more effective in doing the work that you guys are doing. So I just wanted to give some kudos to that, especially since I was the one that asked the question, why aren't we doing that again? All right. So when it comes to these options, so I didn't really have any more feedback on the funding side of things. I do, as much as you've heard me, Sue, share over the years, I want us to borrow as little as possible and pay it off as quickly as possible. The schools that we can fund with like we did for the middle school with the line of credit, if we have that possibility for a project, I would love that. When I got on the board, we had $400 million worth of debt. I'm very proud that we're down to $300 million and actually under $300 million of debt. I don't like the idea of us turning around and adding another $300 million of debt to build several schools really quickly. But if we have got to do some of this work and we don't have another way to fund it, I am cautiously open to what sources we might have to explore. Just because there's some things we're just not going to be able to wait. I don't like the idea of waiting 10 years before we start the bulk of this work. Because I think at that point, some of the consequences of our lost enrollment will be too severe to recover from. All right, so of the ideas, I am also in favor of the K-8 conversions, particularly, and I don't know that you prioritize these in order, but I think that one you put on the top, which is the University Park Stone area.
If I could just interject to say they're absolutely not prioritized in order, and that should be, that's part of the conversation.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, it's prioritized for me the same way as Mr. Thomas, and not just because it's my area. I think that makes a lot of sense. Stone, the facilities team has done great work, but I was just talking to Mr. Bryan. Every time you walk on that campus, you just get the feeling this is an old building, and you can't put enough paint on it to make it look like not an old building. And if we built that shiny new object there that was a K-8 to serve that community, I actually love that idea. I think to get the kind of technology updates that an old building just can't support very well, even though, again, our technology team has done a great job. We've done the best job we can with a 70-year-old building. And I will be so happy. I hope we get invited to the 70th anniversary, even though it's not in District 5. Make sure I get an invitation, Mr. Thomas, to the 70th anniversary next year. But I love that idea. I think it will serve that community well. And of the ones on that list, that's the one that I think would be most beneficial, looking at the capture rates, looking at the age, looking at the utilization. For the 7-12 conversions, again, you said you didn't put them in priority, but to me, the top idea is the best idea, the Satellite Delara, because those are the only two that I'm aware of that are literally right next to each other, share a parking lot, Satellite and Delara. Satellite has been close to capacity my whole time on the board, and Delara now with the new middle school is it's the easiest thing for them to share spaces, and if Delara can take some of the pressure off of Satellite, because we may have to move some fences and move some things around, but I think that one makes sense to do sooner rather than later if they're amenable to it, as the community is. So I like that idea. Boundary adjustments, all of us board, I hesitate to speak too much to areas that are not my areas, and not just because of my district, because I've lived in West Melbourne for almost 18 years, and I know the South area really well. And I know the North area and the Central area just mainly from my time on the school board. But I do feel like that Viera area, you're talking about all A schools, talking about some balancing, and Mr. Susan will probably have some more to say about that. But I think some slight adjustments up there. When in my time on the board, Quest, before we built Viera Elementary, was bursting at the seams, and lots of things we were doing to try to fit so many kids into one building. It makes sense to kind of make those adjustments up there because they're all newer buildings, newer-ish. 20 years doesn't seem like a new building, but it's newer-ish. I also think that the Riviera, Lockmar, I think that would be one that the community down, that is exactly my area. Actually, my neighbor is zoned for Riviera. I think that is an area that could, that the community would be willing to look at. Again, I don't speak for everybody in the Palm Bay area, but I think the community will be willing to look at adjustments from Riviera to Lockmar. And then also all those that you have listed in Palm Bay, from Port Malabar down to West Side, to make some adjustments to schools that, again, things that the parents look at, just being honest and transparent. A lot of C schools in that group, and if you're moving from one C school to another C school, and because that area of Palm Bay is so many new people, there aren't the traditions like, I went to this school, my mother went to this school, my grandmother went to this school. You don't have that so much in Palm Bay, one, because the schools weren't around then, but also because people are in and out so much of that area. I think that area, I could be wrong, but I think that area will be a little, we've tried not to do boundary adjustments, and Ms. Hannah's been really careful not to do, but I think this area would take some of those better. And then as far as the other things, and I want to give this the time that it needs. I think the Cape View Roosevelt consolidation makes sense. I mentioned that already. I think that makes sense. And there are, I'm going to mention this because it also is relevant to the next thing I'm going to say. Having done some sat in some demographic study presentations, even including in DC just in the fall, they talked about the graying of our communities and different areas. And the truth is, we have certain parts of our community that are graying. And so it's not that an area like Cape View, it's not that we're losing kids in that school to other schools. There just aren't as many kids in the community. And so the population is shrinking in that area, not because it's a bad school, it's just there aren't as many kids in the neighborhood because the population, all their kids graduated and they've moved on. And there aren't as many young families in that area that have, so it makes sense in that area in particular with the potential upside, again, of potentially having some property to sell. I did wanted to add, when we talk about the phasing out of use of portables, I'm going to mention this out here. West Shore is a completely stable population. They have the same number of students year after year after year because they have a limited population. They also have a lot of portables. I've already said that to Ms. Hen, but if we're talking about that, I think that we need to look at doing something for West Shore because we shouldn't be using portables for a school that has a permanent number of students. And so if we can do something to, if we have funding to put again, one of the really old campuses, I don't think it's on here anywhere in our presentation, but it's an old campus, the old Central Junior High. For people who have been here way longer than I've been here, know that. I think we need to get that done at some point in the long-term plan, even if it's not in the next couple years. All right, I saved McNair for last. But because we have so many people that have been reaching out to us, and we've got so many people here today, let me just share my thanks for you guys and your participation. I want to just, again, this is not final conversation, but I'm just going to be completely transparent and share with you guys and also with the community who may be watching or who are in the building my initial thoughts on this. And I have done some look at different aspects of it. So I want to address some of the concerns that people have talked about. One is teachers losing their jobs. I can pretty much guarantee that every teacher, if we were to close a school, any school in this county, we would have a job for them somewhere else. And I give this as an example. We're closing the ALCs. I think there were 31 staff that we were needed to relocate. And I have not heard any doubt that all 31 of those staff, and I'm getting a thumbs up from the back table there, we are able to find a spot for that. I just checked. According to what I was able to find, we have 59 total staff members at McNair. I just want to allay those fears. I'm not saying I've made final decisions, or certainly the board hasn't made a final decision, but my thoughts, we've got 59 staff members that I'm sure we can relocate. We are always in need of more assistant principals and principals, always in need of teachers, always in need of IAs. Those people will find a spot, especially if we're consolidating, because then we're combining things. I want to thank Alex Goins for reaching out to me, and board, I had a great conversation with him last week to address some of these concerns. We talked about academic progress, educational opportunities, long-term success of our students. Those are some things that were in the kind of copy-paste emails that we were getting all week long. But they're worth addressing. I will tell you that my biggest concern with this, with the McNair situation is I have serious concerns about schools with tiny populations, because the truth is the smaller the population, the fewer opportunities that those schools have. The current size of McNair, according to our October census, was 262. A school with 262 students, a middle school with 262 students, cannot afford a band director, choir director, orchestra director. These are things that are important to me, these opportunities. And I've actually, somebody shared that they used to be a fine arts hub. I guarantee you they are not now. They are not now. Because the size that they've been, some of our schools that shrunk down, in my time on the board, I've only known one school that had one person who could do band, orchestra, choir. It was the wonderful director who was at Palm Bay High School last year, but he only did it for a year and then he left to another opportunity. It is very hard to find someone who is willing to do all three, much less able to do all three and do them with excellence. That's just one thing, because music is my world. But when you talk about CTE programs, you talk about technology programs, a school that's that tiny cannot support the many opportunities that the larger schools can. So I'm just being completely transparent. If we had the opportunity to consolidate two middle schools that are smaller size, the one that was suggested was McNair and Kennedy, then we can get them back up to a population, because Kennedy also lost some of their music teachers this year. We get them back up to the size where they can support not just music, but art and CTE programs and all those other opportunities that it's really hard for small schools to do. And this is speaking as a person who has very large middle schools in my area, and I know the opportunities that they have because they are so big, like Central and Southwest and even Stone. So that is my biggest concern, is small. So if there's a way to get McNair bigger, then maybe. But I don't think the things that the people have been suggested to us, oh, let's create more programming. Well, we did that. We've also done it at Palm Bay High School. And Palm Bay High School has more CTE programs than any other high school, and yet the population has not grown. So I'm not looking at just age of the school and the expense of the school. It is old, and it is expensive, but it's not the only old and expensive school. So but the size of it is what bothers me, because it limits opportunities for students. And I just took a look, because I think one thing that's happening at McNair is also the graying, the aging of the community. When I looked at our From To chart that you guys sent us, we passed it in our last board meeting, and the public can look at that on our March 25th agenda. It was the student accommodation plan. There's a chart that shows where kids go from different schools. McNair has a population right now of 262. 191 of those are from McNair's zone. They live in McNair's zone. Only 45 students are going to charter schools from McNair. I say McNair because it's relatively, it's not that they're all leaking away to charter schools. 45 students are going to charter schools from McNair. 65 are going to other BPS schools, but guess what? 40 of those 65 are going to Kennedy. So 40 are already going to Kennedy. And so if you take that out, only 25 are going to other schools. So what I'm seeing is, even if McNair captured all their kids back, they're still going to be the tiniest of our middle schools. So that small number is not going to necessarily go away. As far as McNair, I said they only have 191. They get the rest of their kids from... you get 71 schools that are zoned for other, 52 of them from Cocoa. So 52 of the middle schoolers from Cocoa actually zone out of Cocoa into McNair. The next just for reference, the next smallest middle school we have, middle school population, is Cocoa Beach, which is a junior senior high, so we don't see that impact. The next smallest is Madison, which is 446. So close to 200 students more than what McNair has total. So I'm just gonna go back, and I've looked at the trends from 2010 all the way to 2024. McNair has steadily dropped despite all the things that we've done. And again, I think it goes back to the aging population of the community. There just aren't as many kids in the community as there used to be. They've also, and this is one of the reasons why it's important. And sorry, board, I'm taking my time. This is a lot of information. One of the reasons why it's important is when a school is so small, we had a rock star principal up there. I'm not saying the principal now he's a rock star too, but we had a rock star principal a couple years ago at McNair, and she and her staff worked their tails off and got McNair up to an A in 2018. And the very next year they dropped down to a C. Same principal, same teachers, some of the same students. But let me tell you, one of the things that happened was, when you are so small, If you can have all this progress, but if you have just a few students who don't do well, it affects the school grade more. So that's a problem with having such a small school. One of the problems with having such a small school, another one. So they have continued to, their last couple grades have been a B, a C, and a C, but again, the smaller the school, the more just a few students not doing well has a detrimental effect. And that is, so there's, it's not because we haven't put money in it, I checked on that. We put $4 million of our sales surtax plan into McNair over the last however many years we've had the surtax. So that's kind of it's big picture. I just think whatever the solution is, and maybe there's a possibility we pull some COCO kids, because that's been presented to me. What if we pull the COCO middle schoolers out of COCO and put them in McNair? That's a possibility, except, and I don't think, some people say, oh, then it's a problem because most of the McNair kids all go to Rockledge, so you'd have kids going some to Rockledge, some to COCO. I don't have a problem with that so much because, for example, Central in my area, half the kids go to Heritage and half the kids go to Mill High. They say goodbye at the end of 8th grade, and it's not the worst thing in the world. They can deal with that. But the problem, the one downside of that is COCO currently has 1,435 students. If we take all the middle schoolers out, we're taking 480 students out, and that means COCO will be less than 1,000 students, which is not impossible. But we have some nice shiny new buildings that we put on COCO's campus to get some programs, and I think then we have a utilization factor there. Not saying I'm opposed to it, but that would be part of the things that we have to factor in. So I just want to be as transparent with the community as possible about all these issues. It's not as simple as we've got an old building, we don't want to spend the money. There's a lot more problems from my end that I have with having such a small school, and I'm happy. This is one thing I will commit, board and the community. I drive past McNair all the time when I go up to my Children's Hunger Project meetings, but I will commit that I haven't actually been on the campus. I will be on the campus and then before the end of the school year to make sure that I've had eyes on and conversations with the people at the campus, because I want to make sure that I see for myself and hear for myself what's going on the campus. So I commit to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me that extra time without tapping the table.
You were absolutely, I did not have the timer set. That's good. That was awesome.
Okay. All right. I'm going to try to make up some time and just be quick here. A couple things that I have that I'm thinking. I think that it would be worth the district's effort to potentially petition the commission to look at an impact fee study to generate more revenue. So that I would like to ask for that if the board supports it. I'm not opposed to the consolidation of the K-8 conversion. I think one of the issues that I have, though, is I don't have the enrollment numbers for each of these, so I don't know if the difference that we're talking about in a school could be, are we talking about a school for 1,000 students? Are we talking about a school for 2,000 students? The K-8 conversion might be, we might look at a different scenario if we're talking about a variation of 1,000 students, because that's obviously a much larger school that will need to be built and far more expensive. So I'm not opposed to the UP Stone. I think that's probably the best case scenario based on what this says, provided that there's not a huge variation in students, there. I, again, do not support going in debt over this. So for me, I personally, that's kind of where I land. I like the line of credit that we did. That was very unique. One of the things I'll say, I do want to talk about the McNair issue, because I have felt extreme frustration since last week when this hit the internet, and I'm going, where is this coming from? I didn't know we were closing McNair. How does the internet have this, right? And so obviously this is the rumor mill that ran wild, but then I'm looking at this and I'm like going, okay, somebody somewhere, that last slide that says the consolidation, that's probably where it came from, right? Like the ideas of potential things that we could do. We have to give McNair a little bit of time. In all fairness, we just opened a brand new middle school board. So for us to look at McNair the very next year and be like, hey, I don't know, the enrollment's down, give them a little bit of time. You might see some students that transferred from McNair to the new middle school that might say, you know what, I really miss the facility, whatever I had going on over at McNair. So for me, I have no interest whatsoever at touching that school right now. There has been a lot of changes in that community. Losing a hospital, we cannot, it's just, I don't think that's the wisest thing for this board to do. I think we need to wait a little while and see what happens as far as stabilizing out the student enrollment there. I had a question, and I don't know, this might be an absolutely crazy idea, but we keep talking K-8 or 7 through 12. Is there a potential to do maybe we took all the 7th graders from Cocoa High and put them at McNair? What does that look like? Is that a possibility? And then make Cocoa High 8 through 12 to not disrupt. Is there anything that prevents us from doing such a thing like that? I don't know. I'm just throwing out an idea of something that's very unconventional, because we always talk K-8 or we talk 7 through 12, but we don't ever look at, can we break those grade spans up any differently? So maybe something worth exploring. The rezoning, I think, is also another possible option to eliminate a school closure. I think that's the best interest if we're looking at some of our other schools that are overutilized. It makes sense to obviously spread things out. And one of the funny things about Brevard County, obviously, the population moves around, right? So Brevard County became very big because of the Space Center. So obviously, like Merritt Island, Cocoa Beach, those areas, Titusville, had a ton of growth all at one time. So we built schools to accommodate the capacity that we were seeing come in. Well, now industry has changed. People have moved. We see things going on, Vieira, I've lived here so long before Vieira was Vieira. So I know, it was farmland out here. There was nothing. So this is just kind of what happens, and it's hard. It's tough to make a tough decision and say, hey, we got to look at this as overall. But I'm of the mindset of, let's figure out how do we drum up more enrollment. Let's look at, can we disperse enrollment from schools that are overfilled and put them possibly in some of these schools that are underutilized. But I think as far as McNair goes, we need to give that a minute, because we just opened up a new school. And so I think you need to let the dust settle from that for a little bit. And then we may have to have this conversation in a year or two and look at it again and say, okay, where are we at? Has anything stabilized out? I think the community is aware now that, hey, we need to drive enrollment up. We want to make sure that whatever we're doing, if we can do something better, give us an idea. We love it. We want to make it better. So, and the internet is not always accurate. So again, I'm gonna get off my soapbox about that, because I was very frustrated last week when I saw this hit the internet, and I'm going, what? I'm on the board. I haven't heard this. And I'm going, I didn't know we were closing a school. What is happening? And we're having community meetings, and I'm going, this is just, so I think we had the cart before the horse a little bit on this one. So I apologize for all of the high emotions that come from the potential of closing a school. That's gonna obviously make everybody upset. So, but moving forward, if you can just tell me the enrollment numbers so that I know if we're talking about a K-8 school. I like the UP Stone idea, but making sure that the enrollment numbers aren't varying by a significant amount that would cause the cost of the school to be much higher. So I think that's all that I have.
All right.
Thank you. One of the first things I wanted to say is, Sue, thank you so much. When we spoke in this about 2016, 2017, we talked about the K-8 model for new construction and stuff like that. And just so that I may be able to say to everybody in this conversation, our largest deficit in education is in 7th grade, when the students leave 6th grade and they go to 7th grade. That's when we get hit the most. So the K through 8 model adjusts that and fixes that achievement gap for us. And so it was when we first were going to build Vieira Elementary School. I kept screaming to build it as a K-8 because I knew that eventually we would build another middle school, and I wanted to hedge off some of the things. But it's a model that works. If you look back across the country at any achievement model of K-8s, they outperform the elementary and middle school partners very high. It's almost like between 15 and 25%, depending on the area. And it gets to it allows the kids to grow inside that school. The backside to that is that anytime you get to an elementary school, I think the achievement levels is right around 750 students. You get above 750 students, you start to see decreases in achievement with certain students. You start to see decreases in achievement inside of students with disabilities, students with 504 plans, students with that a large school is not good for them. You know what I mean? They just don't adapt to it. So there's but definitely benefits and negatives to K-8s, larger schools, and everything else. I've spent a lot of time across this state of Florida in a lot of different school districts. And I'll tell you, I've walked into districts that have made the decision to move in this direction, to consolidate elementary schools to middle schools, to create K-8s that have 2,000-3,000 people inside of it, or 1,200 to 1,500 to 18, and it's a different feel. It's not a community feel. And I think that that's something that we need to take a look at. I do appreciate XYZ coming in. You made all of your evaluations based upon, capacity and age. Those are two huge factors when we have to deal with fiscal responsibility as a district. The one things you guys didn't do is achievement levels and community engagements. For instance, I've seen across the state where in some instances, somebody will put up a school, close a school, put it up for sale, and then the sale of the school, because it's such a large property, will impact the neighborhoods in such a negative way that it becomes a pretty bad situation. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of other factors that our board has to take a look at. I will say, there's a lot that we can do, and we talked about it inside of my district between rezonings and everything else. But what I want to try to focus on is I want to try to take a look at K-8 conversion research. So before, like Ms. Wright was saying, before we decide to make a move on any of these or light our district on fire, let's do our research. How many times have school districts moved from having an elementary school and a middle school, converted them, and what was the achievement differences? I think we could take a look at that. I have not seen that as anything out here. It should be a positive moving into that, but let's make sure. The other thing I would like to do is look into because many of the school districts, many people may not know, but our 6th grade we are one of only 2 school districts. It was Clay County. I'm not even sure if we're the last one now, but as of a couple of years ago, that has 6th grade in elementary school. That's why we see such a big drop in 7th grade. I think when you have certain areas like this, like a McNair or something, you could actually move the 6th grade into the middle school, right? The argument that would be is I would like to see where that's been done before and what the conversion research would show. Meaning, if we did move the 6th grade into the middle school, did that actually help, or did now the 6th graders just end up dropping off because of the achievement and stuff like that? We have to be ready if we're going to make decisions. We have to take a look at these things in depth. The other thing that I didn't hear much about, and this wasn't you guys, I'm not saying, but the conversation between a public and private partnership ideas. There's many school districts across the country that have come up with these innovative places where you have private business along with public schools in the same respect. And I haven't heard any of those up. So I would really love to take a look at K-8 conversion research, 6 into middle school conversion research, private and public partnership ideas, okay? I did want to shift real quick into a conversation. One of the, Miss Campbell had mentioned earlier that Palm Bay's CTE programs have not grown. She's 100% right. They haven't. We've put every bell and whistle on that school to try to get people to go there. They haven't. But we haven't provided transportation from other places to the school. And if we would actually do something like that, we might be able to have students that would go. I do know if you look at Osceola, say for instance, they have one big tech center, right? That place is full. Kids are going to it. They provide transportation to it. It works. We've just come to the assumption that we're going to put a bunch of things there and people are going to come, but they're not. It's hard for families to drive kids in high school. It's hard for kids to do that kind of stuff. So when we talk about flowing of CTE programs, I love Mr. Thomas's idea, right? I think the other piece that we really need to do is look at a true bus corridor cost. We're talking on here about millions of dollars in construction. But what we're not talking about is, and we end up in the same position we just reshuffle the deck. So we go build K-8s over here, we go elementary school over here, we go high school over here, and then it all settles, and then we're all going to half new schools or whatever it is. That's great. But the other piece is we're still going to those same schools. Palm Bay still doesn't have people going to that school because there's no transportation. We don't have a true tech corridors inside of there. I wouldn't doubt it if, and this is a scenario, I am not saying this for sure, I just wanted to say, for instance, if you took Cocoa middle schools, or Cocoa high schools, middle school students, moved them to McNair, right? And then you took and made Cocoa a true tech center where you could use the transportation. I promise you kids would leave Vieira High School and many of the areas around here to attend that tech school. I do, I know my area very well. When I talk about that bus corridor, I also wanted to talk about, I have families right now that don't like Vieira Middle School or Vieira High School. They just don't, right? They just don't. And it's nothing against the schools. They do a great job, right? My schools are awesome, but it's just different strokes for different folks. A lot of it has to do with the size. So if we were to provide a bus for families out of the north area or out of Vieira to Kennedy Middle School or Delora Middle School, those buses would be full going out of our area. So I'm not saying that those are the ideas we do. I'm just saying that part of the community engagement, we should ask parents, if you were provided a bus to Kennedy or to Delora, how many of you would actually take it? And I think that that works. I truly believe that when I was the same way as Miss Wright, like all of a sudden I had my closest friends were calling me and saying, hey, why are you closing our school? And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? Like, you know what I mean? And just so everybody understands, 2012, I worked with the families that were fighting the Gardendale and all those moves. And in 2017 and 18, I worked with families to try to rezone my areas, which was favorable to the people that were inside those zones, and I got voted out against it. So I very much am not the type of person that just dives in and starts saying, let's go do this. I would really like to do a lot of research. I think Ms. Wright's comments were 100% there. I'd like to take a look at some of the research and everything else, because the final piece to what I have to say is we have 2 big taxes coming up. And if those things don't get renewed, all the plans we have right now are going to go out the window. And we're going to have an entirely different conversation. And I would hate to be halfway through one and then all of a sudden have to shift gears and come this way. I do understand that we have a fiscal responsibility. We absolutely do. We do. But I think that there needs to be more research before we start moving people, groups, and everything else. So that's my sense. You guys know I already talked to you guys about some of the zones that I was taking a look at. You know, I think the other piece that I would really love to do, and Ms. Han and I were on the phone today about it, some of our elementary schools could convert to K-8s, but then we were talking about, do they have to have a gym? If they don't, that makes a very unique situation for a lot of opportunities across our county. If you would just be able to take it and convert it, how much does a new gym cost?
No idea.
Awesome.
Yeah, right now it's probably impossible to.
But
We're having to figure out how we can
if you need to,
keep track on
if you need to, but if you need to, sometimes you may not. With the movements of the new athletic programs, they're able to go to schools where we don't have athletic programs at different sports at different schools that are actually at West Shore or Edgewood. So we might be able to do that. If I can take a look at that, that would be great. That's all I got. Thank you.
All right. Well, it's one thing we are full of, and it's information. No, that's good. Some would argue that. Again, thanks for everything here, guys. The one thing this is a long-term strategic, and it is long-term. Now that's, you know, the information out, the cat's out of the bag of all the possibilities out there, it's going to take time. And the nice thing is we have that time. The time is on our side to go back to the community. As you can see here, we have questions for staff. We have questions for you. And that's going to take time, which is, again, it's on our side. Nothing is so pressing that we have to make something an immediate answer. Which leads me to what Ms. Wright was talking about, and Matt and some of the others, is, you know, the rush, the confusion that the community had gotten, and I apologize for the community that got such poor information. I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the great conversations. I got some community leaders looked like they were enjoying causing confusion in your area, and I apologize for that because I couldn't call every single one of you. Please reach out to a board member if it involves your schools so we can set the story straight. I'm not going to say everything was great because I advised against meeting in a community before this meeting went ahead, because this could have alleviated a lot of the anxiety in a community. So that's why we're here. That's why you elected us. Please reach out in the future. You know, you're all very important. Your opinions are important. But when I get a letter or an email that says, please reconsider, there's a lot of assuming going on there. We didn't do anything yet. And, you know, I don't know how long that had been going on in the communities before it actually got to social media. And we have enough problems in our lives right now to be concerned about things that are not even happening or potentially may never happen. So I apologize for that. There's a phrase that you guys were used, and I'm not going to use it. But please just reach out to any and all of us in the future if anything comes up with any of your schools or in your communities. That being said, I mean, if Dr. Rendell was here, this would be a question for Dr. Rendell is, what are the advantages, but Sue, if you want to, what are the advantages for a student and a family that goes to a fully utilized school? What would you kind of?
So I think, some of what Ms. Campbell was talking about in terms of programming makes perfect sense. Like, you have more program options and opportunities and resources when you have more students, because your resources follow the number of students, just obviously. I'm obviously not on the educational side of the house, so we're about at the limit of my knowledge of the answer to that question. But I do think, we heard from some of the students last night that there's some comfort level with smaller classes. So there's that side of it. But I think there's also the ability to provide more opportunities, broader opportunities, goes with greater number of students.
Right. And are you aware that we've already had schools to lose programs because of the underutilization? Right?
Yes.
So as we say, we have all the time in the world, but students are losing opportunity when we have an underutilized school. So I mean, we have time, but we need to keep that in mind as we go forward. Low-hanging fruit, things that cost the least, fiscally responsible, frugal, if you will, and that's looking at boundaries. I've heard it up and down here. Let's look at with this growth that we've had and the graying of our community, boundaries may have to be looked at, and I think that's the easy thing for us to do, and the responsible thing to do is not. That would be the easiest thing, and we could look back and say we did what we needed to do, and it alleviated the problem. So boundaries would be great, grade configuration. Those are the easy things. I mean, we can add programs, but if you look at the capture rate, some of those underutilized schools and the capture rates are high. So the students just may not be there, and we have to come to that realization. If we get to that point, we can't create the customer if they're not there, and that's unfortunate if that happens. So, but even if we all said the exact same thing up here, 5-0, we need to do something today, it's going to take an enormous amount of time. And that's something that the community can sit back and say nothing's happening tomorrow. And we are obviously not on the same page in every avenue, because it's going to come back with another bump in the road, another fork in the road, and it's going to take time. But I feel we did what a responsible district would do, a responsible company would do. A corporation, a huge one, would have long strategic plans. When I was on a church council, we were doing the exact same thing. We were bringing in consultants and say, what's this congregation going to look like in 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? So we're doing what we're supposed to do, and we're going to involve the public in every step of the way. But keep in mind that board back there, that board behind here, that our responsibility is to serve the student and the education of that student and the parent of that student. Yes, I appreciate the thoughts of somebody who graduated from a school 30 years ago. That's wonderful. But we need to keep our children's education in mind today and moving forward in this board, especially myself. You're only going to get decisions based on what's good for those students in that community. Okay? I'm not looking at votes. I'm not looking at what's going to look good in the paper. But if it makes sense for those students, I'm going to be fighting for that. But we have a long way to go, and I appreciate everything you guys have done. Guys, anything else?
Chair, I'm sorry, I didn't thank you guys for all the hard work. I'm sure this is a very thankless job, and it's criticized heavily, and I know that you guys put a lot of effort into this, and so I apologize for not starting there from a thanking point. I was just trying to go through my points of what I wanted to, convey to you guys, so I apologize, and thank you so much for all the work you've done for our district.
I want to say thank you to Sue. One thing I left off, when we do those boundaries, we should also we should call transportation and find out what the impact and cost is, because we might say we want to move some schools around and find out that we don't have enough buses to do it. Yep. But I did want to say something for the McNair families that came and the individuals that came to support. I forgot to say this. I was very disheartened about what happened to, we're getting the calls. But the one thing that I did want to say is how awesome it was that you guys cared about your school as much as you did, and that you were willing to go out of the way to fight for it. And that, to me, was kind of bittersweet on top of the actual fact that, you know, we're sitting there with miscommunication and stuff, but I was like, man, they rallied, you know, and you guys care about your school. And I appreciate that coming from, I wish we had that with some of our other schools. And a big shout out goes to you guys for that. I'm proud that we create a schools district that people are willing to fight to keep their schools. And I want to say thank you for coming. I know a lot of you guys, you don't have the opportunities. You got to leave work and everything else. So thank you. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
I think we all feel that way. Thank you so much. That's all we have for you guys.
Yes, sir. I think, just to summarize, I think what I'm going to do is we'll spend a little time thinking, debriefing, and working up a plan of work for us that we'll get back to you so you guys all know sort of where we're heading. And, you know, it seems like there's quite a bit of research. I'm thinking maybe a pilot project with U Park and Stone, just kind of working through the steps and seeing what that starts to look like. Some potential boundary changes. I think we're going to need to engage the transportation folks and talk a little bit about some of the transportation ideas, impacts, and such. The grade configuration research a little bit more in that arena, but this is just sort of off the top of my head reacting to what you've said, so I'd like to put it on paper and get a work plan that you all can look at and agree that this is where you would like us to go in terms of next steps.
Ms. Sue, I had one last thing because I got called by a bunch of parents from Edgewood. Edgewood is not on this list of anything.
As we could see,
Just
that
want,
wasn't
just
there.
want, just want it to be known that Edgewood is not part of the conversation of what's happening here. That's all. I just want to
Okay.
verify.
Yeah, it was there
It-
somewhere.
Yeah, well, yeah, I don't think anybody here has any idea about that. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. Guys, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for all your effort. Does any board member have anything further to discuss?
Mr. Chair?
Does anybody? Oh,
Mr. Chair?
yes, Kevin.
Nothing to do with facilities, so if you want to let these guys go, I do have one other item. It's totally up to you.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Just real quickly, the January workshop, I brought up the idea of doing the invocation before school board meetings.
Correct.
And I've asked, the board asked Mr. Gibbs to do some research, which he's done, and I would like to hand these out to you guys, just to. And what I would like to do, without belaboring it, is just, if you guys read what Mr. Gibbs provided in his memo, along with the other research he had done with Miami-Dade School District and Osceola County, he did some extensive research. And I would just ask that the board give direction to Mr., without objection, I guess, if we're not voting, I'd like to ask Mr. Gibbs to draft a policy for invocations at regular school board meetings that's based on the policy currently in Miami-Dade, and that includes the recommendations that Mr. Gibbs provided in his memo dated April 4th, 2025, and have a draft policy ready for the board to consider on April 22nd on the agenda. So I don't know if that's how to move it forward in a work session, other than to make sure, see if we have.
Yeah.
It's a good point. You brought it up. Good job. Yeah, I read the memo. You know what I mean? Look good from my spec. You're going to bring a rough draft into the workshop. We'll bang through it and then come up. Is that what you're looking for?
Well, this is a rough draft, but basically, based on what Mr. Gibbs' research, it's pretty much already done by Miami-Dade. So
This is Miami-Dade.
this is Miami-Dade's with Brevard inserted into it instead.
So just so I can understand, Mr. Thomas, you'd like us to look at this, maybe voice any concerns from now until the meeting for any kind of changes, and then we have a policy document that comes out at that meeting that you spoke about?
That works for me. I'm
I'm
just,
okay with that, yeah.
try not to, paralysis through analysis.
No, I get it. I get it. I just didn't know if, it'll just take me some time to move through it, that's all. And
If
right
you would
now-
like to have it at the next work session instead, and then.
No, I'm good. I'm good. We'll work through it.
Okay.
And then, Paul, if I'm okay, I know Miami-Dade, a lot of their policies are in line with some of the stuff that we've done. But if you do have a couple of people who have some concerns or something on the backside, maybe then we move to a different thing. But I'm pretty much good. I looked at a couple of these policies across the state. Thank you for bringing this forward.
Absolutely.
I do not, no, I'm good.
Awesome. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Any board member have anything else? All right. Is there no further business? This meeting is adjourned.